you've watched any of those montages I've thrown up where I'm just stabbing some of my friends in the backs and they can see what it looks like from my perspective and hopefully understand it a bit clearer, and there's those silly moments where people are getting pancaked, you'll notice in there that there's an arena in the sky on a bowl where you can fall off. It's got an interesting skyline. You'll also notice that there's an isolith location where you're fighting on a circular platform, and it's surrounded by lava, and you might have thought, I've never been to that place before, how the hell do you get there? Well, they're actually arenas that are created by the person who's looking into this and making this quality of life stuff like the Dragon Blood. And a huge props to the guy who's doing it, because it's amazing, it's really, really cool. And I love them. I think that they're so exciting and so different, and I actually didn't think I'd like them, but when I got in there, I realised how elegantly designed they were, how clever they were, and how fun they were. And they're especially fun when there's lots of people in there too, which is great. So this led my mind to thinking about, well, what else could you do with this? You know, where else could you push this? And I don't know how hard these are to make. I don't know what goes into it. So instead, I do what I do best, which is come up with ideas. I'm much more of an ideas man than I am the architect and engineer of those ideas. So as it stands, there are 3. One of them is a Berg, like recreation, that has the same dimensions, and it's got none of the clutter that's set off in Sif's arena in the garden, which looks really nice. And it's an interesting atmosphere as well, which is a cool one. Another one is the floating one in the air where you can get ringed out like you're playing Soul Blade. And then there's the lava one, which has got the environmental hazards on the edges. And these are the 3 areas that you can do it at the moment, and they all kind of have their own purpose and have their own reason for being there. There's only so much you can do with these systems without it becoming too complicated or too difficult to do, and I'm sure that these were hard enough to make as they are, and I'm very appreciative for them. But if I were to workshop some ideas, the first ones that came to mind would be an area in the Crystal Caves. So in Duke's Archive, there's an area that is really, really interesting and looks really, really ethereal. It's this wonderful blue colour palette, it's got lots of fog and atmospherics going on, and it has this motif of curse. And then of course you fight a boss there who can curse you, and he has this move that is a crystal attack where these crystals grow on the ground, and if you stand on them, you take residual damage, and then it fills a bar, and if the bar fills, you die and you become crystallised yourself. So I think it would be a really nice alternative to the Super Bowl to have an area in the Crystal Caves with the exact dimensions of the Super Bowl there, you know, with the circular platform in the middle. And then instead of it having lava around it, it could have just a bed of those spikes, those cursed crystal spikes. And whenever you go into the area where the lava would start hurting you, you instead get that chip damage that builds up, and then the bars would build as well. And when the bar gets to full, instead of being cursed and having all the problems that curse brings, it could just kill you. And that's the repercussions for not spacing, not being in the right place, not managing the arena properly, and your opponent essentially locking you out and edgeguarding you. And if that's too harsh, or if that wouldn't work too well when people started playing, you could maybe change it to a bleed proc. And that way, you know, there could be something skillful in the manipulation of, you know the bleed's coming, and you know you can iframe the bleed when it procs, but can you do it while you're being pressured? So it might turn into a situation where people could go actively onto the crystals to chase you down, to try to, you know, seal the deal. And then there could be some counterplay to that in you getting back on, and that could be a pretty interesting idea. But I think the motif here is what's most important. Intrinsically, this is the exact same as the Super Bowl. I'm just swapping the area for dukes, and I'm swapping the lava for crystals, that's all. And it's just to give it a different palette. And in the background here, I'll have some mock-ups showing you the idea of what it might look like to visualize. And another idea here for people that want a bit more diversity could be to change the dimensions of the arena. You could make it a different shape, you know, to challenge expectations on how you move and what you use. And the example I'll give you is, instead of it being the circle, you could make it a square and make it the exact same dimensions as that area that people fight in Sen's Fortress just above the bonfire. That area there is really quite a claustrophobic and interesting location to duel. That could work perfectly. And then the other areas I thought about would be a Blight Town equivalent of this. And this could have a series of platforms, and they could be decayed / some of them waterlogged, some lower than others, some higher than others, and it would be kind of a stepping stones arena. And the water, instead of affecting your mobility, because fuck that noise, nobody wants to wear the rusted iron ring, we could have it that it builds toxin and poison at the same time. And it could be a case of course, it surrounds the arena, but there's also pockets of it here and there, so your very movement, where you roll and how you condition your opponent and how you move in relation to your opponent could become a really interesting dynamic. And then it would make the item usage and some of your armor choices maybe a little bit more important, because if you get pushed into a bad area and you really can't go too many places, you have to choose the poison over whatever else it is you could get hit by. And then it also introduces interesting Oki, because when you get knocked down in this, of course, you have to eat that stand-up, and depending on how you wake up, depending on the option that you choose, depends on how vulnerable you are to those status effects and to those maladies, so I think that could be quite interesting. And then the shapes of this could be pockmarked, it could be maybe a torus that's got, difference in thickness, it could be anything that works really when you put some time into designing it and figuring it out. And then there's 3 quick ideas here that are nowhere near as developed, that I just think are quite interesting that people might have thought of, and I'm just going to mirror those sentiments. So the first one is sense traps in some sort of environment. So everybody knows who's been through Sense Fortress. There are these swinging axes from the ceiling, and I don't know how hard it would be to isolate those assets and pop them into an arena, but just the idea of having some kind of ridiculous Castlevania arena would be really, really fun. Secondly, I like the idea of a kind of a Super Monkey Ball level, like the rooftops in Anor Londo. If you look at those rooftops, they're quite thin, and they lead to an area that thickens out and has a chandelier. Now imagine those rooftops if there were more of those walkways, more of those girders, and they were different thicknesses, and you could maybe roll from one to another. You could use your movement ability to stay safer, but every single swing, every single choice could be you falling off and losing. And of course, this could be a nightmare to try to make work, and it might not even be any fun, but because of that ball in the sky where you fall out of it, it definitely had my mind running at what you could do on some kind of adjusted Anor Londo rooftops, with everybody just treading the boards and trying to push each other off. That could be super fun. And then the final idea is more of a concept than anything else. Passive PvE element. So if anybody played Turok the Dinosaur Hunter back in the day, there was a couple of levels on that game where you were PvPing with your friends on split screen, and there were dinosaurs in the environment that would attack anybody. So there was this additional threat, and of course, many years later, that's turned into what you could do in Titanfall in League of Legends with these mobs on the map that you can use for resources and things. But I think it would be really interesting if there was an external threat like red phantoms of some sort, or some kind of enemy that could intercept and interfere. And a bit of an example of this would be, if you've ever fought in the depths, you know that main area that you fall down into, which is kind of that hub that leads to that door that leads up to the bonfire and the shortcut. In there's a couple of those blobs knocking around, and if you've ever been invaded and fought in that area, the blobs will get involved. So just the idea of having this thing that can test for your lock-on and is just being a nuisance and, can gank you or all of a sudden do a ton of damage. And if you know the enemies in this game, you'll know some of them are terrifying, whereas some of them are trash, and that could definitely be something that can evolve into something more. So, arena concepts in general. I love the idea of these custom arenas. I think they're super cool. I'd love to see some development there, but even if we don't, I'm grateful for what we have, because they're awesome.